The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and good morning, everybody. This is Nick Cortina here with Exago. I'm real excited to be back on one of the first support labs I've gotten to do in a while, so real happy to be presenting again to you folks. Today's lab is going to be on no data qualified, and more specifically, that means what happens when a report returns no data. So today we're going to take a look at what Exago's default behavior for this scenario is, and what we as report designers can do to better handle this in a way that's going to be a little bit more friendly to our end users. So I guess one of the things I should just make sure, if everyone could just post in the questions, it looks like we're getting some people coming through, so you guys can hear me okay, awesome. So again, we're going to be going through what happens when a report returns no data, what we can do about it. We're also going to touch on one specific admin console setting later on in the lab. So for any admins tuning in, we're going to talk about one specific setting, allow filter dependencies that can sometimes help mitigate the times that we'll be able to, prevent no data from coming back on given report executions there. One of the other things that I did just want to touch on is that as today's lab is going to be fairly straightforward, I'm actually going to be conducting all of the report executions in the latest and greatest 17.2 build. And I'm going to be trying to highlight some of the cool new features and changes as we go, particularly in the formula editor as we begin to build out these conditional formulas. The last thing I do need to say here is that next week on the 13th, we've got a lab all about the JavaScript API that'll be conducted by my colleague Travis McGrath. This one's going to be a little bit more technical in nature, but we're going to give you a little bit of a jump start on learning all about the JavaScript API and everything you'll need to know to start getting in and utilizing that. So on that note, I'm going to jump over to one of my local installations of Exago, and we'll get started. So on my screen currently, we're showing a simple sales report that's showing some order summaries and also showing those summaries for each employee as well. We've got just some simple aggregate sum functions, and we've actually just built out a chart down below, and it's going to show one bar for each employee, with each of those bars subdivided by the respective orders for that given employee. One other thing I do just want to note is we've got a nice little page header here that's actually a formula, and it's using the filter value formula. We'll notice that when we execute this report, I've actually got one prompting filter on the employee last name. So every time we execute this report, we're going to specify the last name of the employee we'd like to see data for. So with that being said, let's take a look at what happens when we execute this report and we know that no data is going to be returned. So I'm going to hit run report, and we can see that prompting filter is going to come up and ask us to provide a value. So here I get to set the employee last name equal to whatever value I'd like. And since I want to make sure that this returns no data, I'm going to pick an employee last name that I know isn't in the Northwind data set. And in light of the fact that a little over a week from now we've got a new Star Wars movie coming out, I think I'll use Luke Skywalker here. So since I know that Luke Skywalker is not in our Northwind data set, if I go ahead and hit OK, the report's going to execute. You might have noticed that execution bar kind of quickly jumped over here, and we immediately see this message, no data qualified for this report. Now on hitting OK, this is just going to take us back to the report editor here. So while again, that was nice to tell us that no data came back, I would say that that's maybe not going to be the most intuitive message to present to some of our end users, particularly for some of those simple one-click users, right? Not everybody's going to know what no data qualified means, right? So what can we as report designers do to better handle this type of scenario? The first thing that I want to draw your attention to is our report options cogwheel. Now, if I select in and go down to my options and dig into the general category here, we've got a whole host of things that we can be modifying, but I'd like to direct your attention to the no data qualified display mode setting. Now, this is something that's set on a report by report basis, and the default is to show the message, and that's going to be that little box that pops up like we just saw. Now, that being said, what we can do is instead choose to show the report here when no data qualifies. So I've toggled this setting to show report. I'm going to hit OK. And let's execute one more time just to see what it'll look like. Again, I'll use the fictitious Skywalker last name. And hitting OK here, we're going to see that this time around, we're displaying the report. We're still pulling that filter value using that function that I touched on earlier, right? But we can see here that that chart is just going to say no data to display. So again, we're getting a little bit closer to something that's going to be end user friendly, but I still think that we might be able to do a little bit more with this. So on that note, I'm going to close out this report execution. And at this point, I think it's time for us to start using some conditional formatting and formulas to better handle this scenario where no data is returned. So the first thing I think I'd like to tackle is this chart. So if no data comes back, I don't really want the chart to just say no data to display. I think I might like to display some other type of user message, right? Something that I get to define so that I can use the language that's going to be most appropriate for the end users that I have to surface this report to. So the first step I think here is going to be to suppress this chart if no data is returned. So how can we do that? Well, we can use our conditional formatting. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the cell that my chart is populating. And I'm going to use the format cells icon here. And you'll see I'm actually already on the conditional view here. Now by default, we'll pop up on the number view, but all we have to do is click over to conditional. And from here, we can use add to add a new conditional formatting rule. And so here, the first thing that I'm going to specify is this action, right? And so here I'm going to set this to suppress this row. And you'll notice that the attribute's going to be grayed out for the suppressed row, because when we're suppressing a row, there's not necessarily an attribute that we need to use here, right? If we were doing something like foreground color, we may want to pick the color. If we were changing the font, we may want to pick the font, right? But in terms of the attribute, there's not necessarily an attribute for row suppression here. The next piece that we have to look at is the actual conditional formula that we need to use to dictate whether or not we want this row to be suppressed. Now, a function, that I want to point out to everybody is in this database and data type category. And as I click and drill down, we're going to notice this is no data qualified function. Now, as I click and select, we're going to see a nice little description of the function here for us. And this says it returns true if no data was retrieved for a report execution. Otherwise, it returns false. So with that in mind, this function can be used to tell us whether or not data was returned when the report is executed. And if it returns true, we know that no data came back. So we can call this function. If it returns true, we can then suppress the row. Now, I did mention that I wanted to touch and highlight on some of the interesting new bits in the formula editor here. So one of those things that I do just want to point out is if we weren't quite sure or we couldn't remember where the is no data qualified function is, we could search for it using the search bar up top here. So I could start typing is no, and we'll see it pops up in the database and data type category here. Now, another thing I want to point out to you folks, and anyone who's familiar with code editors that have something like IntelliSense or something similar to that nature, this might look fairly familiar, is we can actually just begin to type the name of the formula. And we can see that this will start to pop up with any of the functions that actually match the characters that I've typed thus far. And the nice part here is it's also going to give us that description again that we can see just on the right-hand side here. So this summary that returns true if no data was retrieved for a report execution. Now, at this point, I can go ahead and click on this function here, or I can just hit enter to auto-complete that function for me. Again, just some simple quality of life updates to the formula editor that we wanted to touch on here in the lab. So at this point, we have this is no data qualified function, and we know this is going to return true if no data was retrieved for this report execution. So at this point, we can hit OK, and we can hit OK in our conditional formatting menu. And now this chart won't be displayed if the report returns no data. Now, one thing I do want to point out is I'm not going to add any suppression to these group footers on the order ID and the last name. And the reason why we don't need to add conditional suppression to these specific groupings is because these sections, grouping sections, I should say, are data driven. And what I mean by that is that these sections are only going to appear X number of times, where X is going to be equal to the number of order IDs that are returned when this report executes. If this report executes and no data comes back, there are no order IDs for this group to populate with, and therefore these section rows won't be displayed on the report at all. So to illustrate that, I'm going to execute this report one more time as is. Again, I'm going to use the fictitious name Skywalker. And we can see while my page header is still pulling in orders for Skywalker, we're now not displaying any of the other content on the report. So again, getting a little bit closer, but we'd still like to display a nice user-friendly message to let the user know, hey, there's no information here. Maybe you'd like to check a filter or execute the report again or something of that nature. So what we can do is, again, going back to the report editor here, I'm going to create a new row below my report footer. And one thing that we may want to consider is that there may be an instance where we're generating a report and just displaying a chart, and we'd like that chart to sit and fit nice within a dashboard that we've defined somewhere. And then let's say we execute that dashboard and we still want that report to show a nice user-friendly message within the context of the dashboard that no data was returned. Something we might want to do is ensure that that user-friendly message is going to be formatted to still fit the same size that the chart normally would in that dashboard. And so on that note, what we can do is take a look at the row height of the chart we've already created and modify the row height of the new row for our user message to be identical to that of the chart. This means that if this report was executed in a dashboard and no data came back, it would still be formatted nice within the context of that dashboard. So with that in mind, I'm going to first go ahead and merge the available cells in row 7. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to include that user-friendly message here. Now, something else that of is this filter value function. We see that with the report executions I've previously just done for you guys here, that the filter value I'm setting gets pulled and added into this nice little title here to tell us who the orders are for based on which value I specify in that prompting filter. We can do something similar with the user message here. So what I think I'll do is open the formula editor again. And here, I'm first going to input some static text. So I'll start with a quote, and I'll say no orders for, and I'm going to put a space and then an ending quote. So this is my static text. Next, I can use our concatenate operator. This is going to combine whatever's on the left with whatever's on the right. And now we can use that same filter value function that we saw in the page header down here in the report footer. Again, I could search for the function if I want, dig through the categories to look for it, or the new and most interesting way I would think is to just go and use our IntelliSense-like engine here, and we can see this filter value function. So this is going to return the input value of a standard report filter for an execution. So again, I'll hit enter. And then another interesting note I want to touch on here is that for functions that expect an input, we can now add input or input descriptions, I should say, to those functions within the formula editor. And this is actually something that we can add to custom functions we generate as well. Here, we can see that the filter value function is expecting for its first input the index of the filter value that we'd like to retrieve. Since we only have one filter on this report, I'm going to go ahead and type a 1, and that will complete the formula that we'd like to use in this report footer. At this point, I'm going to hit OK, and I'll do some simple formatting to clean this up just a bit. Now, at this point, we've got a nice user-friendly message that's going to say no orders for and whoever the last name is that we select from that filter. But something else that we need to think about is that we're also displaying this page header that says orders for and the last name. If no orders come back, we may want to suppress this title as well and just display our user message. If that's the case, then what we can do is with this row 1 highlighted, add that same conditional formatting rule, again using the Format Cells menu. I'll set my action to suppress row 1 more time. And in the conditional formula editor, I'm again going to use that is no data qualified. We'll hit OK, and we'll be all set. Now, the other thing to consider is that currently this row is going to display on the report every time the report executes, regardless of whether or not no orders came back. As an example, if I execute the report and use the dropdown to select a valid filter value, say Ann Dodsworth, I can hit OK, and we'll see all the relevant information we're looking for up top, but we don't want this message to display if data is returned. So with that in mind, we can jump back to the report editor and add a conditional suppression rule. So I'll use the Format Cells menu. I'll add another conditional formula, again to suppress this row. But this time, instead of just using is no data qualified, I'm actually going to surround the is no data qualified with the not function. Again, I can just start typing into the formula editor and hit enter when I'm on the formula, or excuse me, the function that I'd like to input. And so here we can see that the not is going to negate the value that's input. And the input value here is the is no data qualified function. So what this effectively comes out to is if no data is returned, is no data qualified returns true, and not flips that value to be false. So what does that effectively do for us? This formula here will guarantee that wherever we're suppressing rows if no data qualifies, the opposite will be true for this row here. So now when data is returned, we won't display our user-friendly message that's saying no data came back. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and execute the report again. I'll first do it with a valid value, say Dodsworth. And we can see now that just the important report information is displayed. Our user-friendly message was left off of this execution. I'm going to perform one more execution, again, this time using that Skywalker fictitious last name. And here we can see that just that user-friendly message appears at this point. So I want to pause for just a minute and make sure that there's no questions or anything in the chat. The next thing that I would like to discuss is going to be a little bit more targeted to administrators. We're going to take a look at one admin console setting, and then I'll show you in the report designer what it actually modifies. So if that's something that's not going to be pertinent to you, feel free to jump off at this point. And it looks like we're doing pretty okay on the questions for now. So I am going to move over to the Exago administration console. And as I did mention, this is going to be targeted a little bit more at the admin folks. So if this isn't relevant to you, by all means, feel free to jump off at this point. But I would certainly encourage you to stick around and listen if you think this might be pertinent or if you are just curious. So the specific setting that I'd really like to highlight here is this allow filter dependency setting. And as we highlight it, we can see this tooltip that comes up, and it says set to true to allow the selectable dropdown values for a specific filter to be dependent of the filters above it in the list. Now, again, we can see I've already set this value to true. And when it's applied, it's going to do exactly what that tooltip just said, right? If we have multiple filters in a list and we select a value for the first filter, the second filter's available values with the dropdown will be dependent on that first selected value. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful. So what I think I'd like to do here is actually go back to the Exago homepage, or excuse me, the editor here, and I'm going to dive into the filters menu of the report that we were just working on. And I'm actually going to dive into the orders category, and I'm going to pull this ship country field over to simulate adding some filters to this report. So as an example, let's say that we set our ship country here. We have to set first a value for our last name. So let's say we pick Dodsworth to be our specified value here. And then with our ship country here, right, we can see only values that are going to be relevant to Dodsworth. And to be even more clear, let's select USA as our ship country. And now I'm going to add a ship city filter. So at this point, I think it'll be sort of the most clear to say, because we've specified our ship country to be USA, the available ship cities we're going to see here will only be cities included in the USA. And to go a step further, there'll only be cities in the USA that had orders related to Ann Dodsworth. So if I click this ship city and select this dropdown, we can see Albuquerque, Boise, and Kirkland. Now again, to sort of just completely illustrate this feature, if I remove the ship country filter, we'll now be able to see all of the available ship cities that are related to Ann Dodsworth orders. And as I click the dropdown, we can see those cities displayed here. And again, just so how does this setting relate to no data qualified? Obviously, we can do things as we saw just before to make nice user-friendly messages to let someone know that no data is being returned. But sometimes if we have reports where we have 4, 5, 6 filters, we can imagine that those relationships can start to become a little more complex. And so by allowing filter dependencies, if users are using the drop-down select for the filters, it'll give them a little bit more insight as to what the actual available values are, instead of allowing them to select a value that's going to create a scenario where we return no data.
Hey, Nick, we had a question come in asking if you could show that admin setting. Can you just navigate over and give us a peek?
Yep, absolutely. So navigating into the admin console, and I'll give you guys sort of the base view, right? You'll come in and you'll see the getting started page. You'll notice I've filter settings highlighted on the left-hand side. That's going to be where this setting is located. And while there's a bunch of useful settings that I'd encourage you to take a look at, the one that we're discussing here is this allow filter dependencies. Looks like it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th down the list here. And setting this to true is going to give us the behavior that I just described, where the lower filters in the list, the selectable values will be dependent on the values that have been previously selected in higher up filters. So that's going to be all the content that I've prepared to show you folks today. I hope that you guys were able to learn a few things and get something out of this. Feel free to leave questions in the question box there. We will stick around for a few extra minutes. But thanks so much for tuning in, and happy reporting.
So for those of you that are still here, we had a question come in that I think is very applicable to everybody. Allow filter dependencies, does that, how does it look when you choose to display your filters on output, right? So how does that affect interactive filters? The idea there is that they will respect the filter dependencies as well. So if you do have them as interactive filters on an output, you will still see that that interactive setting, right? You'll still see that apply and filter your proceeding filters there. Great, looks like we cleared that up.